You know that moment when your best friend calls you at 3 in the morning and you can hear in their voice that their entire world just collapsed. That's exactly how David O'Connor sounded when he phoned me from his hotel room in Krabi, Thailand. His voice was shaking, barely above a whisper, and the first words out of his mouth were, "I've lost everything. She's gone, and so is every penny I had." I'd known David for over 20 years, watched him build a successful consulting business in Manchester, seen him through his wife Sarah's battle with cancer, held him at her funeral. But I'd never heard him sound so utterly broken, so completely destroyed by another human being. What happened to David in those 6 months in Thailand wasn't just a romance gone wrong. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. A carefully orchestrated scam that would leave him questioning everything he thought he knew about love, trust, and his own judgment. And if you think you're too smart, too experienced, or too careful to fall for something like this, you're exactly the kind of person these predators target. Because David O'Connor wasn't naive. He was intelligent, successful, and cautious by nature. But grief and loneliness can make even the strongest men vulnerable. Before we dive deeper into this story, I want you to hit that subscribe button right now. Stories like David's need to be told, and I promise you'll never hear them anywhere else with this level of detail and honesty. David was 54 when Sarah died. Pancreatic cancer took her in 8 months. And those 8 months felt like 8 lifetimes of watching the woman he'd loved for 30 years fade away piece by piece. They'd met in university, married young, built their life together brick by brick. No children. They'd tried for years, but it wasn't meant to be. And they'd poured all that parental love into each other instead. Sarah was his anchor, his compass, his reason for getting up every morning. After the funeral, after the well-meaning friends stopped dropping by with casseroles and sympathy, David found himself rattling around in their 4-bedroom house in Didsbury like a ghost. Every room held memories that were simultaneously precious and unbearable. Sarah's reading glasses still on the kitchen counter, her side of the bed still carrying the faint scent of her lavender hand cream, her coffee mug in the sink, because he couldn't bring himself to wash it and put it away permanently. His business partner, Mark, practically forced him to take a sabbatical. "Go somewhere, anywhere," Mark had said. "You're no good to anyone like this, especially yourself." David had initially resisted. Work was the only thing that kept his mind occupied. But eventually, the idea of escaping the constant reminders of his loss became appealing. He'd always wanted to visit Southeast Asia, something Sarah had mentioned wanting to do someday when we have more time. Well, now he had nothing but time. He chose Thailand almost randomly, booking a 3-month stay in Krabi because a travel website promised healing beaches and spiritual renewal. It sounded like marketing nonsense, but David was desperate enough to believe in anything that might help him feel human again. He wasn't looking for adventure or romance. He just wanted to disappear for a while, to sit by the ocean and figure out how to rebuild a life that suddenly felt meaningless without Sarah. The first month in Krabi was exactly what he'd expected. Long days of solitude, quiet dinners alone, and gradual acceptance of his new reality. He'd wake up around 8, have coffee on his hotel balcony overlooking Ao Nang Beach, then spend hours walking along the shoreline. The physical beauty of the place was undeniable. Limestone cliffs, rising from turquoise water, fishing boats bobbing in the harbor, sunsets that painted the sky in colors he'd never seen in Manchester. But beauty felt hollow when you had no one to share it with. David had downloaded Tinder almost as a joke, not because he was ready to date. The thought of being with anyone other than Sarah still felt like betrayal, but because he was desperately lonely and thought maybe he could find someone to have dinner with, someone to talk to. He was very clear in his profile that he was recently widowed and just looking for companionship. Most of the messages he received were from obvious scammers or women clearly looking for financial support, which he politely ignored. Then Lalita messaged him. Her profile showed a stunningly beautiful Thai woman in her early 30s, with long black hair and a smile that seemed genuine rather than posed. Her photos showed her at art galleries, reading books in cafes, hiking in national parks. She looked educated, sophisticated, nothing like the profiles he'd been ignoring. Her first message was thoughtful. "I'm sorry for your loss. I lost my father 2 years ago to cancer, and I know how difficult it is to navigate grief while trying to rebuild your life. If you'd like someone to show you the real Krabi, away from the tourist areas, I'd be honored to help." David stared at that message for a long time before responding. Something about her tone, her acknowledgement of his grief, without trying to immediately shift the conversation, felt different, real. They exchanged several messages over the next few days, and Lalita's English was perfect. Her cultural references sophisticated. She mentioned reading authors David loved, quoted philosophers he respected, even made jokes about British weather that showed she understood his humor. She suggested they meet at a small beachside restaurant she knew, away from the crowded tourist areas. "The food is authentic, and the sunset view is spectacular," she wrote. "But more importantly, it's quiet enough for real conversation." David found himself looking forward to the meeting in a way that surprised him, not romantic anticipation. He wasn't ready for that, but genuine curiosity about this woman who seemed so different from anyone else he'd encountered since arriving in Thailand. The restaurant was exactly as she'd described. A small family-run place with maybe 10 tables, all of them facing the water. David arrived first and chose a table near the edge of the deck, where waves lapped gently against the support posts below. He was nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first date with Sarah 35 years earlier. But it was a different kind of nervousness. This felt like stepping back into the world of the living after months of existing in limbo. When Lalita appeared, David's breath caught in his throat. She was even more beautiful in person. But it wasn't just her physical appearance that struck him. There was something in her eyes, a depth and intelligence that seemed to see straight through him. She wore a simple sundress and minimal makeup, carrying herself with quiet confidence as she approached his table. "David," she asked, her voice soft and musical. "I'm Lalita. Thank you for agreeing to meet me." As she sat down across from him, David felt something shift inside his chest. Something he hadn't felt since Sarah's diagnosis. Hope, maybe, or possibility. He didn't recognize it at the time as the first thread in a web that would eventually trap him completely. Their conversation flowed effortlessly from the moment she sat down. Lalita asked thoughtful questions about his life in Manchester, his business, his travels. When he mentioned Sarah, she didn't change the subject or offer empty platitudes. Instead, she said, "She must have been remarkable to inspire such love. I can see it in your eyes when you talk about her." David found himself opening up in ways he hadn't with anyone since Sarah's death. Lalita listened with complete attention, asking follow-up questions that showed she was genuinely interested in understanding him as a person. She shared stories about her own life. She was an art teacher at a local school, passionate about preserving traditional Thai culture, close to her family despite losing her father to the same disease that had taken Sarah. The similarities in their experiences with loss created an immediate bond. They talked about the strange guilt that comes with having moments of happiness after someone you love dies, the way grief changes your perspective on everything, the loneliness that settles into your bones and stays there. David hadn't realized how much he needed to have these conversations with someone who understood. Halfway through dinner, as they shared a plate of somtam and watched the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, David realized he was genuinely enjoying himself for the first time in months. Lalita had a way of making him feel seen and understood without judgment. When he made self-deprecating comments about being a sad old widower, she gently corrected him. "You're not sad and old. You're healing and experienced. There's a difference." As the evening progressed, David found himself studying Lalita more carefully. She was clearly well-educated and articulate, but there were small inconsistencies that nagged at him. She mentioned teaching at a local school, but seemed to have unlimited free time. She claimed to be from a traditional Thai family, but displayed knowledge of Western culture that seemed unusually extensive. Her phone rang several times during dinner, and each time she glanced at the caller ID with what looked like anxiety before declining the call. "I want you to pause the video right here and tell me in the comments what seems suspicious about Lalita so far. What details are raising red flags that David might be missing because he's lonely and vulnerable? Let me know what your instincts are telling you." But David's instincts were clouded by loneliness and the simple joy of connecting with another human being. When Lalita suggested they extend the evening with a walk along the beach, he agreed without hesitation. They strolled along the water's edge as the sky turned from orange to deep purple, their conversation continuing to flow naturally. "I have to confess something," Lalita said as they found a piece of driftwood to sit on. "I was nervous about meeting you tonight. It's been a long time since I've connected with someone the way I feel I'm connecting with you." David felt his heart skip a beat. "I know exactly what you mean," he replied. "I wasn't sure I was ready for this, but I'm glad I came." Lalita moved slightly closer to him on the log, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something floral and subtle. "Grief has a way of teaching us what really matters," she said softly. "Connection, understanding, the courage to remain open to love even after loss." The word love hung in the air between them, and David felt something inside him both recoil and reach toward it simultaneously. It was too soon, too fast, but also exactly what his starved heart was desperate to hear. "I should probably head back," David said, though every part of him wanted to stay. "Of course," Lalita agreed. But as they stood to leave, she caught his hand. "David, I hope this isn't presumptuous, but I'd love to see you again. Tomorrow, if you're free. I know a place where we can watch the sunrise. It's something special. I think you'd appreciate." David looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. For the first time since Sarah's death, he felt genuinely alive, genuinely hopeful about what tomorrow might bring. "I'd like that," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "I'd like that very much." As they parted ways at the restaurant parking area, Lalita stood on her tiptoes to give him a brief kiss on the cheek. "Thank you for a wonderful evening, David. Sweet dreams." Walking back to his hotel, David felt lighter than he had in months. The crushing weight of grief was still there, but for the first time, it didn't feel like the only thing defining him. He had something to look forward to, someone who seemed to understand him in ways he hadn't expected to find again. What David didn't see as he walked away was Lalita immediately pulling out her phone and sending a quick text message. Hook set. He's perfect, lonely, wealthy, and completely trusting. This will be easier than expected. The response came back within seconds. Good work. Phase 2 tomorrow. Remember, make him feel like the hero of a romance novel. These Western men eat that up. Lalita deleted both messages and smiled to herself as she got into her car. David O'Connor had no idea that the most expensive lesson of his life was just beginning. The next morning, David woke before his alarm, something that hadn't happened since before Sarah's illness. He found himself actually looking forward to the day ahead, to seeing Lalita again, to experiencing whatever sunrise spot she wanted to share with him. He showered and dressed with more care than he'd taken in months, even splashing on the cologne Sarah used to love, then immediately feeling guilty about it. Lalita had suggested they meet at 5:30 in the morning at a small parking area near Raleigh Beach. Trust me, she'd said, the sunrise from this particular viewpoint will change how you see the world. David arrived 15 minutes early, partly from excitement and partly from ingrained British punctuality, and found Lalita already waiting for him. She looked different in the pre-dawn light, more casual in hiking clothes and sturdy shoes, but somehow even more beautiful without the careful polish of the previous evening. She greeted him with a warm hug that lasted just a moment longer than friendship would require, and David felt his pulse quicken. Ready for an adventure? She asked, shouldering a small backpack. The hike to Lalita's secret viewpoint took about 40 minutes, winding through jungle paths that clearly weren't marked for tourists. David was impressed by Lalita's knowledge of the terrain and her physical fitness. She moved through the challenging trail with grace while he huffed and puffed behind her, feeling every one of his 54 years. Almost there, she called back to him, her voice cheerful and encouraging. I promise it's worth the effort. When they finally emerged onto a small limestone ledge overlooking the Andaman Sea, David understood what she meant. The view was absolutely breathtaking. A 360-degree panorama of islands, beaches, and open ocean, all bathed in the soft gold light of sunrise. They were completely alone up there. The only sounds, the distant crash of waves and the calls of exotic birds in the jungle below. My God, David breathed, settling onto the flat rock beside Lalita. This is incredible. How did you find this place? My father brought me here when I was 12, Lalita said, her voice soft with memory. He said it was important to have a place where you could see the whole world spread out before you, to remember how big and beautiful life is even when things feel difficult. David turned to look at her profile as she gazed out at the sunrise, and felt something shift definitively in his chest. This wasn't just attraction anymore. It was the beginning of something deeper, something that scared and thrilled him in equal measure. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that seemed too vivid to be real. Lalita unpacked her backpack, revealing thermoses of coffee and a selection of fresh fruit and pastries. You planned this perfectly, David said, accepting a cup of the strongest, most aromatic coffee he'd ever tasted. I wanted to share something special with you, Lalita replied, meeting his eyes directly. Last night, talking with you, I felt something I haven't felt in a very long time. Hope, I think. The possibility that two people who have both experienced loss might be able to help each other heal. David felt his throat tighten with emotion. Lalita, I have to be honest with you. I'm not sure I'm ready for whatever this is becoming. Sarah has been gone less than a year, and I feel like I'm betraying her memory by even being here with you. Lalita reached over and took his hand, her touch gentle but firm. David, love isn't finite. The love you had for Sarah doesn't disappear or diminish if you allow yourself to feel something for someone else. I think she would want you to be happy, to have companionship and connection in your life. Tears pricked at David's eyes. How do you know exactly the right thing to say? Because I've been where you are, Lalita said softly. When my father died, I thought I would never be able to care about anyone again. The grief was so overwhelming, so all-consuming. But eventually I realized that closing my heart to protect myself from more loss was also closing it to the possibility of more love. As the morning progressed, they talked about everything and nothing. David's business, Lalita's teaching, their shared love of literature and travel, their dreams for the future. David found himself opening up about fears and hopes he'd never shared with anyone, even Sarah. Lalita listened with the kind of attention that made him feel like the most interesting person in the world. By the time they made their way back down the trail, David's mind was spinning with possibilities. For the first time since Sarah's death, he could imagine a future that included happiness, companionship, maybe even love. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. I don't want this morning to end, he said as they reached the parking area. It doesn't have to, Lalita replied, stepping closer to him. David, I know this is moving quickly, but I feel something extraordinary happening between us. I'd love to spend more time together, to see where this leads. David looked down into her dark eyes, seeing what appeared to be genuine affection and possibility reflected there. I'd like that too, he said, making a decision that would change everything. I'd like that very much. Lalita smiled and stood on her tiptoes to kiss him, softly at first, then with increasing passion as David responded. It was his first kiss since Sarah's death, and it felt like coming back to life after a long, cold winter. What David couldn't see, as he lost himself in that kiss, was the calculating look that flashed across Lalita's eyes for just a moment, or the way she mentally noted the expensive watch on his wrist, the quality of his hiking boots, the casual mention he'd made of his little consulting business that had clearly provided him with enough wealth to take a 3-month sabbatical in Thailand. The hook wasn't just set anymore. David O'Connor was about to be reeled in completely. Part 2. Over the next 2 weeks, David and Lalita became inseparable. She seemed to have an unlimited ability to take time off from her teaching job, always available when David wanted to explore a new beach, try a different restaurant, or simply spend hours talking on his hotel balcony. Her knowledge of the area was impressive. She knew hidden waterfalls, secret beaches, local markets where tourists never ventured. Every day felt like an adventure. Every evening like a deepening romance. David found himself falling hard and fast, in a way that should have alarmed him, but instead felt like destiny. Lalita seemed to understand him completely, to anticipate his needs and desires before he even expressed them. When he mentioned missing British newspapers, she appeared the next day with international editions. When he complained about the heat, she suggested perfectly air-conditioned venues. When he worried about being too old for her, she laughed and said age was just a number when two souls connected the way theirs had. The physical relationship developed gradually, which David appreciated given his emotional fragility. Lalita never pushed, never demanded more than he was ready to give. Their first night together, 3 weeks after their initial meeting, was tender and passionate in equal measure. Afterward, as they lay in his hotel bed, watching the ceiling fan turn lazily overhead, David felt something he hadn't experienced since his early days with Sarah. The intoxicating combination of physical satisfaction and emotional connection. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he whispered into her hair as she curled against his chest. "I know I'm falling in love with you," Lalita whispered back, and David felt his heart soar. But even in his euphoria, small warning signs continued to accumulate. Lalita's English was flawless, but occasionally she would use phrases that seemed oddly formal or rehearsed. She claimed to live with her elderly mother, but David had never been invited to her home or met any of her family. Her stories about her past sometimes contained small inconsistencies, details that changed slightly from one telling to the next. Most troubling were the phone calls. Lalita's phone rang constantly, often at odd hours, and she always stepped away to answer. When David asked about it, she would explain that her mother was ill and required frequent check-ins, or that the school administration was particularly demanding. The explanations were plausible, but something in her tone when she gave them set David's teeth on edge. One morning, about a month into their relationship, David woke to find Lalita sitting on the edge of the bed, speaking rapidly in Thai to someone on the phone. Her voice was sharp, almost aggressive, completely different from the soft melodic tone she used with him. When she noticed he was awake, she immediately softened her voice and ended the call. "Sorry, darling," she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "My mother's nurse was calling about medication schedules." "Your mother has a nurse?" David asked, confused. "You never mentioned that before." For just a split second, Lalita's composure slipped, and David saw something like panic flash across her face. Then she smiled and said, "Oh yes, we hired her recently. Mother's condition has been deteriorating." David sat up in bed, fully awake now. "Lalita, what exactly is wrong with your mother? You've been vague about her illness, and I'd like to understand what you're dealing with." Lalita turned away from him, busying herself with getting dressed. "It's complicated, David. Heart problems mostly. I don't like to worry you with the details." The conversation felt wrong somehow, but David couldn't put his finger on why. Lalita's explanation was reasonable, and he certainly understood not wanting to burden a new partner with family health crises. He'd done the same thing early in his relationship with Sarah, minimizing his own mother's dementia to avoid seeming like damaged goods. As their second month together began, the relationship took on new intensity. Lalita started staying at David's hotel more frequently, essentially moving in except for the nights when she claimed she needed to care for her mother. She began talking about their future together. Perhaps David could extend his stay in Thailand, or maybe she could visit him in Manchester. "I've been thinking," she said one evening as they shared dinner on his balcony, "about what happens when your sabbatical ends. I don't want to lose what we found together." David's heart raced. He'd been thinking the same thing, but hearing her voice, it made the possibility feel real. "What are you suggesting?" "Well," Lalita said carefully, "I could apply for a visa to visit England. We could see how things develop in your home environment. If things work out the way I hope they will, maybe we could start building a life together." The idea thrilled David more than he wanted to admit. That would be wonderful, but visa applications can be complicated and expensive. Actually, Lalita said, I've been researching it. There's an expedited process for fiancé visas, but it requires proof of financial stability and serious commitment to the relationship. David's pulse quickened. Fiancé visa? Lalita blushed and looked down at her hands. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. David, I love you. I love you in a way I didn't think I'd ever love anyone. I know it's fast, but when something feels this right, why wait? David reached across the table and took her hands in his. I love you too, Lalita, more than I thought I could love anyone again. That night, as they made love with unusual intensity, David found himself imagining a future with Lalita as his wife. He pictured her in his house in Manchester, meeting his friends, maybe even finding a teaching position at a local school. The vision felt not just possible, but inevitable. The next morning, Lalita brought up the visa topic again, but this time with more concrete details. I spoke with an immigration lawyer yesterday, she said over breakfast. He says the process would be much smoother if we could demonstrate that our relationship is financially stable and that you're capable of supporting me during the transition period. What kind of documentation would they need? David asked. Bank statements mostly. Proof that you have sufficient funds to support both of us while I establish myself in England. The lawyer suggested having at least £50,000 available to demonstrate serious commitment. David nearly choked on his coffee. £50,000? I know it sounds like a lot, Lalita said quickly, but it's not money you'd lose. It's just about showing the immigration authorities that we're serious and financially stable. Once I get established with work, we'd have access to those funds for whatever we need. A house, a wedding, starting our life together. The conversation continued over several days, with Lalita providing increasingly detailed information about visa requirements and timelines. She'd clearly done extensive research, speaking with lawyers and immigration consultants. Her dedication to making their relationship work touched David deeply. What he didn't know was that every piece of information Lalita provided was carefully crafted fiction, designed to make him comfortable with transferring large sums of money into accounts she controlled. By the end of their second month together, David had agreed to begin the visa application process. Lalita had found a law firm that specialized in UK immigration, and they'd scheduled an initial consultation. The lawyer, a distinguished-looking Thai man who spoke excellent English, confirmed everything Lalita had told David about the requirements and procedures. The key is demonstrating financial stability and genuine commitment, the lawyer explained during their meeting. The UK authorities are very thorough about investigating fake relationships designed solely for immigration purposes. They want to see significant shared financial investment and long-term planning. David found the lawyer's professionalism reassuring. His office was impressive. His credentials were displayed prominently, and his knowledge of immigration law seemed comprehensive. When the lawyer suggested that David could demonstrate commitment by establishing a joint account with Lalita and depositing the required funds, it seemed like a logical next step. This way, the lawyer explained, the authorities can see that you're not just romantically involved, but financially committed to building a life together. It's exactly what they look for in legitimate relationships. That afternoon, David and Lalita went to a local bank and opened a joint account. David transferred £60,000, slightly more than the minimum requirement, because he wanted to ensure there would be no bureaucratic delays. Watching Lalita's face as the transaction was completed, seeing her eyes fill with tears of joy and gratitude, David felt more certain than ever that he was making the right decision. "I can't believe this is really happening," Lalita whispered as they left the bank. "I can't believe I found someone like you. Someone willing to take such a leap of faith for love." David pulled her into his arms right there on the busy street, kissing her with all the passion and hope he felt. "I'd do anything for you, Lalita. I want to build a life with you." That night, they celebrated with an expensive dinner at the resort's finest restaurant. Lalita was radiant with happiness, talking excitedly about their future plans, about showing David her favorite places in England when she visited, about introducing him to her mother once the visa was approved. "When do you think you'll be able to travel to Manchester?" David asked. "The lawyer thinks it could be as soon as 6 weeks if everything goes smoothly," Lalita replied. "I can hardly wait to see your home, to meet your friends, to start our real life together." David raised his glass of wine in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said. "To new beginnings," Lalita echoed, her smile dazzling in the candlelight. But even as they celebrated, David noticed that Lalita seemed distracted, frequently checking her phone and occasionally excusing herself to take calls. When he mentioned it, she explained that the immigration process required a lot of coordination and communication with various officials. "It's stressful," she admitted, "but worth it for our future together." David accepted the explanation, but a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that something wasn't quite right. He pushed the feeling aside, attributing it to his natural anxiety about such a big life change. Remember to subscribe to our channel and let me know in the comments. Have you or anyone you know experienced something similar? These romance scams are more common than people realize, and sharing these stories helps protect others from falling into the same trap. 3 days after they opened the joint account, everything changed. David woke up alone in his hotel bed, which was unusual. Lalita typically spent every night with him now, leaving only early in the morning to check on her mother. He checked his phone. It was nearly 10 a.m., much later than he usually slept. There were no messages from Lalita, which was also unusual. She typically sent good morning texts if they weren't together. He tried calling her, but the call went straight to voicemail. He sent several text messages throughout the morning, each one more concerned than the last. By afternoon, he was genuinely worried. What if something had happened to her mother? What if there was a family emergency? Unable to concentrate on anything else, David decided to go to the school where Lalita claimed to teach. He'd never visited her workplace, which now seemed odd, but he remembered the name of the institution from their conversations. It took him nearly 2 hours to find the school, and when he arrived, his heart sank. The building was clearly abandoned, with boarded-up windows and overgrown grounds. A security guard at a neighboring business told David that the school had been closed for over 2 years due to financial problems. David felt the first real stab of fear pierce through his worry. If Lalita didn't work at this school, where did she go during the day? What else had she lied about? He drove back to his hotel in a state of mounting panic, trying to call Lalita every few minutes. The calls continued to go to voicemail, and his text messages remained unanswered. By evening, he was frantic. That's when he decided to check the joint bank account. Sitting in his hotel room with his laptop open, David logged into the online banking system they'd set up together. The page loaded slowly, and when it finally appeared, David stared at the screen in complete disbelief. The account balance was zero. All £60,000 had been withdrawn that morning in a single electronic transfer. The transaction showed Lalita's digital signature and had been processed at 9:15 a.m., about the time David was waking up alone. David's hands began to shake as the full scope of what had happened hit him. The woman he'd fallen in love with, the woman he'd been planning to marry, had stolen everything and disappeared. The joint account that was supposed to demonstrate their commitment to immigration authorities had been nothing but an elaborate setup to give her access to his money. He tried calling the bank, but was told that since the account was jointly held and the transaction bore valid authorization, there was nothing they could do without a police report. He tried calling the immigration lawyer, but the phone number went to a disconnected line. When he drove to the office where they'd met, he found an empty suite with a "for rent" sign in the window. David sat in his rental car outside the fake law office and felt his entire world collapse for the second time in less than a year. First, cancer had taken Sarah, and now a sophisticated scam had taken his financial security and his faith in his own judgment. At 54 years old, he felt utterly broken and completely alone. But the worst was yet to come. The next morning, David received a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. When he answered, he heard a man's voice speaking heavily accented English. "Mr. David O'Connor?" "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is not important. What is important is that your girlfriend Lalita owes my organization a significant amount of money. Since she has disappeared with your funds instead of paying her debts, that debt has now transferred to you." David's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't owe anyone anything." "Oh, but you do, Mr. O'Connor. Lalita borrowed money from us to fund her operation with you. The visa applications, the fake lawyer, the bank setup, all of this cost money. She was supposed to repay us from your contribution, but instead, she has kept everything for herself." "How much money are we talking about?" David asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. 200,000 baht, about 6,000 of your English pounds, plus interest and penalties for her betrayal. David's head was spinning. "I don't have that kind of money. She took everything I had." "That is unfortunate for you, Mr. O'Connor, but it does not change what you owe. You have 48 hours to arrange payment, or we will be forced to take alternative collection methods." "Are you threatening me?" "I am explaining your situation." 48 hours, Mr. O'Connor. We will call you with payment instructions." The line went dead, leaving David sitting in his hotel room, shaking with fear and anger. Not only had he been robbed of his life savings, but now he was apparently in debt to what sounded like organized criminals who expected him to pay for the privilege of being scammed. David spent the rest of that day trying to figure out his options. He could go to the police, but what evidence did he have? He could try to leave Thailand immediately, but he had no money for a flight change, and his credit cards were maxed out from funding the relationship with Lalita. He could call his business partner Mark for help, but the humiliation of explaining how he'd been so thoroughly duped was almost unbearable. As the 48-hour deadline approached, David made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He wasn't going to pay these criminals, and he wasn't going to run away in shame. He was going to fight back. The plan that formed in David's mind was born of desperation and fury in equal measure. He'd spent his entire career solving complex business problems, negotiating with difficult clients, finding creative solutions when conventional approaches failed. This situation was just another problem to solve, albeit one with much higher stakes. First, he needed information. David spent hours researching romance scams, organized crime in Thailand, and the legal options available to foreign victims of fraud. What he discovered was both illuminating and terrifying. The scam that had been perpetrated against him was sophisticated and well organized, involving multiple players and fake organizations. Lalita hadn't been working alone. She was part of a network that targeted vulnerable foreigners with surgical precision. Second, he needed allies. David reached out to other expats in the area through online forums and social media, carefully sharing his story without revealing specific details that might compromise any future action. To his surprise, he discovered he wasn't alone. Several other men had been targeted by similar scams, though none had lost as much money as David. Third, he needed leverage. This proved to be the most challenging aspect of his situation, but also the most crucial. David realized that the criminals threatening him had made a tactical error. They'd revealed their connection to the fake law office and the visa scam. If he could gather enough evidence about their operation, he might be able to turn the tables. When the criminals called back demanding payment, David was ready for them. "I don't have 6,000 pounds, he told the voice on the phone. "Lalita took everything I had." "That is your problem to solve, Mr. O'Connor. Perhaps you can borrow from friends or family." "Actually," David said, "I think I have a better solution. I think you're going to forgive this debt entirely." There was silence on the other end of the line, then harsh laughter. "You are not in a position to negotiate, old man." "Actually, I think I am. You see, I've been busy since we last spoke. I've documented your entire operation. The fake law office, the fake immigration consultancy, the bank accounts used to launder money from victims. I've connected your organization to at least 6 other romance scams targeting foreign men in this area over the past year." The laughter stopped. "You have nothing." "I have enough evidence to shut down your operation permanently," David continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Photos, bank records, witness statements from other victims. I've also made contact with both Thai police and British consular officials. One phone call from me, and your profitable little enterprise becomes the focus of an international investigation." "You are bluffing." "Try me. Call back in 24 hours, and I'll either have heard from Lalita about returning my money, or I'll have delivered everything I've gathered to the authorities. Your choice." David hung up, his hands shaking with adrenaline. He had absolutely no idea if his bluff would work, but it felt good to finally take action instead of being a passive victim. The next 18 hours were the longest of David's life. He'd actually been telling the truth about gathering evidence. He'd spent every waking moment documenting what he could about the scam network, reaching out to other victims, and researching legal options. But he had no idea if it would be enough to save him from whatever these people might do if they called his bluff. At 6 p.m. the following day, his phone rang. This time, the voice was different. Older, more educated, speaking better English. "Mr. O'Connor, I understand you believe you have information that could be problematic for our business interests." "I don't believe it," David replied. "I know it. What exactly do you want?" "I want my money back, and I want to be left alone." "That may not be possible. The money has been redistributed, but perhaps we can reach an alternative arrangement." For the next hour, David found himself negotiating with what he now realized was a sophisticated criminal organization. The conversation was surreal, discussing theft and extortion as if they were legitimate business transactions. But gradually, they reached an understanding. David would not go to the authorities with his evidence, and the organization would consider his debt paid in full. They would also make an effort to locate Lalita and recover what money they could, though they made no promises about success. You should know, Mr. O'Connor, the voice said as their conversation concluded, that you have impressed us with your resourcefulness. Most victims in your situation simply pay or flee. You chose to fight back. That shows character. I'm not sure if that's a compliment or a threat. Perhaps both. In any case, our business is concluded. You will not hear from us again, assuming you honor our agreement. David hung up, unsure whether to feel victorious or merely lucky to have survived. He'd managed to extricate himself from immediate danger, but his financial situation remained dire. He had enough money left for maybe 2 more weeks in Thailand. And then, he'd have to find a way home with virtually nothing. But something had changed in David during this ordeal. The broken, grieving man who'd arrived in Thailand 3 months earlier was gone, replaced by someone harder, more resilient, and paradoxically more hopeful about the future. 2 days later, David received an unexpected phone call. The voice was female, young, and spoke perfect English with a slight American accent. Mr. O'Connor, my name is Jennifer Kim. I'm a journalist working on a story about romance scams in Southeast Asia. And I understand you recently had an experience that might be relevant to my investigation. David was immediately suspicious. How did you get my information? I've been tracking this particular scam network for over a year, Jennifer explained. Your situation came to my attention through some of the other victims I have interviewed. I'd like to meet with you if you're willing to share your story. That afternoon, David met Jennifer at a coffee shop in Ao Nang. She was a petite Korean-American woman in her early 30s, carrying herself with the confident professionalism of an experienced investigative journalist. Her credentials checked out. She freelanced for several major publications and had written extensively about organized crime in Southeast Asia. Your case is unusual, Jennifer told him over coffee. Most romance scam victims lose smaller amounts and never fight back the way you did. The fact that you managed to negotiate your way out of debt to these criminals is remarkable. David told her the entire story, holding nothing back. Jennifer listened intently, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair with a thoughtful expression. David, I want to propose something that might sound crazy, she said. I've been trying to expose this particular network for months, but I've never had access to someone with your level of detailed information. If you're willing to go on record with your story, we might be able to shut them down permanently. What would that involve? Working with Thai authorities and international law enforcement. Your evidence, combined with what I've gathered from other victims, might be enough to launch a serious investigation. But it would mean staying in Thailand longer, testifying if necessary, and potentially putting yourself at some risk. David considered the proposition. The sensible thing would be to go home, lick his wounds, and try to rebuild his life quietly. But something about the idea of turning his humiliation into a force for justice appealed to him. What about Lalita? He asked. Do you think there's any chance of finding her? Jennifer smiled grimly. Actually, that's the other thing I wanted to tell you. Lalita isn't her real name, and she's not Thai. Her real name is Nina Petrov. She's Russian, and she's currently operating a similar scam in the Philippines targeting Australian men. David felt a mix of anger and vindication. You found her? I've been tracking her for 6 months. She's part of an international network that rotates between different countries, always staying one step ahead of law enforcement. But if we can build a strong enough case here in Thailand, we might be able to get her arrested when she tries to move to her next location. The conversation continued for another 2 hours, with Jennifer outlining the risks and potential benefits of cooperation. By the end, David had made his decision. "I'm in," he said. "Let's shut these bastards down." The next 3 weeks were intense and complicated. David worked closely with Jennifer and a team of Thai investigators, providing detailed testimony about his experience and helping them understand the sophisticated methods used by the scam network. His evidence proved crucial in connecting several seemingly unrelated cases and identifying the organization's leadership. Most importantly, they were able to track down Nina Petrov, the woman David had known as Lalita, just as she was preparing to leave the Philippines for her next target location. She was arrested by Philippine authorities and extradited to Thailand to face charges. When David first saw her in the courtroom, handcuffed and wearing an orange jumpsuit, he felt an unexpected pang of sadness rather than satisfaction. The beautiful, caring woman he'd fallen in love with had never really existed. Nina Petrov was a career criminal who specialized in exploiting lonely, vulnerable men. Everything about their relationship had been calculated performance designed to separate him from his money. But Nina had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated David's resilience and resourcefulness. During her trial, it emerged that she'd victimized dozens of men across multiple countries, stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars over several years. David's case became the keystone that brought down her entire operation. The trial lasted 6 weeks, with David serving as the primary witness for the prosecution. Testifying about his relationship with Nina/Lalita was emotionally brutal, having to describe in detail how thoroughly he'd been manipulated and deceived. But it was also cathartic, transforming him from a victim into an agent of justice. Nina was ultimately sentenced to 12 years in prison, while several of her associates received shorter sentences. More importantly, the investigation exposed an entire network of romance scammers operating throughout Southeast Asia, leading to dozens of additional arrests and the recovery of significant stolen funds. David didn't get his money back. Nina had already spent most of it, but he received something more valuable: closure, justice, and a renewed sense of purpose. On his last day in Thailand, nearly 6 months after he'd arrived as a broken widower, David stood on the same beach where he'd shared his first sunrise with Nina Lalita. But this time, he wasn't alone. Jennifer Kim stood beside him, no longer in her professional capacity as a journalist, but as someone who'd become important to him during their weeks of working together. Their relationship had developed gradually, built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than lonely desperation and calculated manipulation. "So what happens now?" Jennifer asked, taking his hand as they watched the waves roll in. "I go back to Manchester," David said. "I rebuild my business, my life. I try to figure out what I've learned from all this." "And what have you learned?" David was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "That grief makes us vulnerable, but it doesn't have to make us victims. That trust is precious, but shouldn't be withheld entirely because some people abuse it. That sometimes the worst experiences can lead to the most important growth." Jennifer squeezed his hand. "Those are good lessons. What about you? What's next for the intrepid investigative journalist?" "Well," Jennifer said with a smile, "I might need to visit Manchester sometime soon. I've never been to England, and I hear it's lovely in the spring." David felt his heart lift in a way that was entirely different from the manufactured euphoria he'd experienced with Nina. This felt real, honest, built on truth rather than lies. "I'd like that very much," he said. As they walked along the beach together, David reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He'd come to Thailand as a grieving widower, seeking escape from his pain. He'd been targeted, manipulated, and robbed by sophisticated criminals who specialized in exploiting vulnerable people. But instead of being destroyed by the experience, he'd found strength he didn't know he possessed. More importantly, he'd found a way to transform his victimization into something positive, helping to protect other potential victims and bringing criminals to justice. And in the process, he discovered that it was possible to love again without betraying the memory of the love he'd lost. The story of David O'Connor and the Thai romance scam became a cautionary tale that Jennifer featured in a major magazine article, helping to raise awareness about the sophisticated methods used by international fraud networks. David's willingness to fight back and seek justice inspired other victims to come forward, ultimately leading to the dismantling of several similar operations. But perhaps more importantly, it demonstrated that even the most devastating betrayals don't have to define us. We can choose to be survivors rather than victims, to seek justice rather than simply endure injustice, and to remain open to genuine love even after experiencing its counterfeit. 6 months later, Jennifer did visit David in Manchester. She ended up staying much longer than originally planned, eventually relocating permanently to continue her journalism career from a European base. Their relationship developed slowly and honestly, built on the solid foundation of mutual respect and shared experience. They married 2 years after meeting, in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. David's business partner, Mark, served as best man, and during his speech, he mentioned how remarkable it was to see David not just survive such a devastating experience, but emerge from it stronger and happier than he'd been in years. David and Jennifer now work together on projects exposing various forms of international fraud, using their combined expertise to protect vulnerable people from sophisticated criminals. They've helped shut down dozens of scam operations and recovered millions of dollars for victims. But more than their professional success, their relationship represents something powerful about human resilience and the possibility of finding authentic love even after experiencing its most convincing imitation. As David often tells the victims he counsels, the people who try to exploit our loneliness and vulnerability are counting on us to be ashamed, to hide, to suffer in silence. The moment we decide to fight back, to seek justice, to tell our stories honestly, we take away their power and reclaim our own. Nina Petrov remains in a Thai prison, where she'll spend the next decade reflecting on the consequences of her choices. Her victims, including David, have moved on to build better, more authentic lives. And sometimes, late at night in their home in Manchester, David and Jennifer will sit together and marvel at the unexpected ways that life can surprise us. How the worst betrayal can lead to the most genuine love. How the deepest vulnerability can become our greatest strength. And how the courage to fight back against injustice can transform us from victims into heroes of our own stories. That's the real lesson of David O'Connor's story. Not that we should be suspicious of everyone we meet, but that we should trust our instincts, maintain our boundaries, and never underestimate our own capacity for resilience and growth. If you found this story compelling, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life accounts of survival, justice, and redemption. And here's what I want you to do right now. Share in the comments below. What's the most important red flag people should watch for in online relationships? Your insights could help protect someone else from falling into a similar trap. Let's build a community of awareness and support together, because knowledge truly is the best defense against those who would exploit our fundamental human need for connection and love. Remember, every story we share makes it harder for predators to find their next victim. Your voice matters, your experience counts, and together we can make sure that stories like David's end in